what exactly does changing the landscape of hospitality mean? And to answer this very, very important question and to shed some light on this, we have a person of immense stature in the hospitality business to share his knowledge and experience with us. We have Mr. Nazir Khamisa, who is the Chief Hospitality Officer of the Simba Corporation, an organization that is making changes rapidly across Sub-Saharan Africa. Mr. Khamisa, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. It's been a long day, I'm sure, for most of you. I'm probably wondering, most of you are thinking, thank God this is the last guy who's going to be on the stage and talking. Yeah? I'll make this short. It's a very, very simple presentation. And just wanted to kind of go over some of the challenges. So we'll start with an overview, which a lot of people before me have kind of talked about. Some of that might be a little bit of a repetition. And then I'd like to kind of end this conversation with looking at what the opportunities are, which have been discussed in a short way around some of the speakers that are here. And with the developments that you see happening today in Kenya, you can actually feel the optimism in the marketplace today in terms of how the investor is looking at Africa in general and Sub-Saharan Africa. So start with a few numbers, then we'll talk about opportunities, and then we'll talk about some challenges, and then we'll just finish the conversation with an overview. So very quickly, in terms of numbers, okay. Slides are not like I had them, but that's okay. This is the wrong agenda. So let's just scrap this. I don't know where this came from. Anyway, let's talk about what I have to say. An overview of why Africa, and specifically why Sub-Saharan Africa. For the last 10, 15 years, everybody's been talking about Africa being the next frontier. In the last 10 years, just very quickly, I spent about 40 years in the US. I'm Kenyan born, third generation, left when our friend Idi Amin did his thing in Uganda. My father got scared and decided that he wasn't going to stay in Kenya. And we left, and I never came back for 40 years. I worked for Simba Corporation, which is an automotive company. They wanted to diversify into hospitality, and I decided to come back and take over that portfolio. We own the Kempinski in Nairobi. We have Olare Mara, which is a luxury tented camp, which we operated and then gave it over to Kempinski to run. And now we're embarking on a journey called Acacia. We have a 4-star property in Kisumu, and now we are looking at developing that particular brand across the region. We're also in food service, and we're developing a complex here in Nairobi that's going to house about 8 or 9 different concepts. And we're into a little bit of B&B, where we import Portuguese wine and distribute that around the city. So hospitality is all-encompassing. It's not just about hotels. It's got to do with restaurants and anything that has to do with leisure that we enjoy. The World Tourism Council estimates that hospitality in Africa is going to probably in the next few years give us about 3.8 million jobs. And this will happen over a time. When you look at Kenya, although we had a little bit of political instability in Kenya, the number of visitors that were coming into Kenya increased by about 13.3% over the year before. We've had some issues in this country, and originally we had a tourist base or a visitor base of about 1.8 million people coming in. We're now at about 1.2 and growing that hopefully back to the way that we are. So hospitality will definitely play a very, very big role in the economy of any country in Sub-Saharan Africa, and especially in Kenya. JLL study couple of years ago said that in 2017, the hospitality industry will attract about $1.7 billion worth of investment. They said that in 2018, it will attract about $1.9 billion worth of investment. With a project like Pinnacle, maybe that'll be way surpassed because it's a pretty large project. Those of you that live in Nairobi will see another large construction project, also mixed use, going up on Wayaki Way next door to the Kapinski. That's a conglomeration of 6 buildings. 2 of the buildings are also 40 stories and I think 36 or 38 stories. The 36 or 38 stories is going to be a JW Marriott, an office building, and then 4 residential towers. So when you look at this development, I don't think you can drive anywhere in Nairobi today and look at a street where there is no construction going on. You will actually see a tremendous amount of development going on. Today, those of you, again, that live in Nairobi will know that there are probably in the region of about 20 or 24 hotels being built just in the Nairobi area. So why? Why Africa? What is it that makes Africa the next frontier? There are some fundamentals that we talk about, read about over the last few years when Africa is now being touted. So the first part of that conversation is that we have a very high population growth. In 2015, we were 1.2 billion. In 2025, we're expected to be at about 1.5 billion. There's a tremendous amount of urbanization going on. In 2015, we were 40% urbanized. In 2025, it is said that we're going to be about 44% urbanized. 4% is a lot, because I think some of you might have seen that little story about 6 or 7 of the largest countries in the world fitting right into the African continent. So it's not a small continent. The demographic dividend is huge. The median age in Africa is 18 years. The median age in Europe is 42 years. Now what does that mean? That means that there is a tremendous emerging middle class. Now I call it the mini India syndrome, but basically in Africa today you will see a tremendous amount of middle class income growing. Those habits that the youngsters have today, some of the speakers talked about, they have a very different need. They are much more freer with their money, and they want to live a certain kind of a lifestyle. So when we say an emerging middle class, we don't only mean there's an emerging middle class. We also talk about the fact that the disposable income of that middle class is spent in a different way. And a lot of it is spent on leisure. A lot of it is spent on holidays. A lot of it is spent on eating out. A lot of it is spent on luxury items. So that's very, very important that we have a young population, that is going to be doing that. The other fundamental is that there is a low supply base. So, for example, in Africa, for every one hotel room, there are 2,000 people. In Europe, for every one hotel room, there's 160 people. So yes, there is poverty here, and maybe we can't compare the spending power of everybody, but with the population base of what we have today, you can imagine what the potential could be as that supply base percentage goes lower. And then there is some numbers in terms of where tourism is going to go in Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa. So in 2015, the numbers were that we had about 38 million arrivals. In 2025, they're expecting that it's going to be about 58 million arrivals. So that growth is something that's very important. So how has this market changed? 10 years ago, which is very, very little time. This is, I think, my 9th year here. When I arrived in Nairobi, we could talk about maybe 3 brands at the most. There was the Hilton downtown, there was the Intercontinental, and there was the Fairmont. Today, if you look at the landscape of what has happened just in Kenya, you will see a totally different picture. How does the investor look at this picture? There was a time when the investor would want to build a hotel, and the reasoning process was that I can run it by myself because I don't need to be paying the percentage of my revenue to the brands. If you look at the landscape today, you have Kapinski, you have Accor, you have IHG, you have Starwood, you have Wyndham, you have City Lodge, you have Movenpick here, you have Dusit here. So as we move along, you are going to see this landscape changing. And we'll talk a little bit in the next couple of minutes about what this landscape means. But if you look at the last, I think, 12 months, Sheraton 4 Points has opened up, Hilton Garden Inn has opened up, City Lodge has opened up, Movenpick has opened up, the Trademark Hotel, which is also affiliated to our franchise, has opened up, Pullman is coming in, and even the properties that decided to go independent decided in the last year to also brand their properties. So if you look at the Lazizi at the airport, it's become a Crown Plaza. If you look at the Amber, it's become a DoubleTree by Hilton. So that tells you which way this industry is growing. One of the effects of the increase in inventory of the rooms is something that we need to pay attention to. As these rooms increase, there was an article that some of you might have read in the Daily Nation about 3 to 4 months ago, that occupancies in Nairobi have dropped 11%. And that is the effect of the increased inventory in the rooms that we have. So basically what that tells you that it will take a little bit of time for the number of stays in the region to increase at the same pace as investment is increasing. But I think by 2019, 2020, we have a total turnaround in the economy. You know, we've been through the struggles in the political instability that we've had. So very quickly, we'll talk a little bit now about the opportunities. What are the opportunities in hospitality today? If you look at the development around the Sub-Saharan region, there is a tremendous opportunity today in the main cities being Nairobi, Kigali, Dar es Salaam, Kampala, etc., of putting in better quality hotels. So if you look at the Nairobi scene, some of the brands that I talked about, so these are 4-star properties, 5-star properties, and the bigger cities can probably bear the rate structure that we would need in order to have that. Africa is definitely a destination. What is being realized about Africa is that there are attractions that were never before looked at as something that we needed to tout ourselves with. Some of those things are the heritage that we can talk about, the culture, the traditions, the wildlife, the natural beauty that exists. And it's, in Kenya especially, I've been away 40 years, and when I came back, it was very, very apparent to me that Kenyans already have hospitality in their DNA. You don't see that everywhere, but you definitely see it in Kenya. And that translation of that is that some of the challenges that we go through in terms of building service-oriented businesses in countries that are like Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, is that the service delivery is where we lack, where we stop. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second in terms of what our mindset was when we decided to put the Kempinski together. In this country especially, the opportunities have now gone a little bit further than the fact that we can just develop in the main cities. The government has changed its constitution, and we have devolution over here. We have 47 different counties, and now we have 47 different governors that want to do something for their counties. What does that mean? They're all politicians. They've all worked in government. They all have contacts. They're all reaching out to investors, like Mr. Karuri said, and they're all trying to attract business into their counties. What does that mean for hospitality? What that means is, as we travel to these counties, if there are no nice facilities, then those counties don't make it. Give you a very simple example. We decided to do the first Acacia in Kisumu. And we decided to do it with the same mindset and philosophy as we had done the Kempinski in Nairobi. And we decided, okay, let's put a really nice property in Kisumu. And we walked in, for those in the hotel industry, we walked in with a rate of double what the next hotel down was. But we decided that we wanted to take that risk because we had a product and we had a service delivery that was exceptional. After doing that, opening it up, the governor came to the hotel one day and he says, you know, Nazir, there's one thing I just want to say to you. I'm a governor, but I've always been ashamed of asking the president to hold his governor's conference in Kisumu. He says, thank you for bringing this property to Kisumu, because now I'm so proud that I can go ahead and tout and say, okay, I can do this, you know. And I think it's a small statement, but it's a statement that is very, very important, because if you're going to attract outside investors into any environment, the first thing that the county has to show and prove is that they are also up to hosting people like that and businesses like that. And when we as investors go into those areas, we should be welcomed with welcome arms, because we're enhancing that environment and helping in that process. The restaurant business is something that I talked about in Nairobi. I think, honestly, the restaurant scene is world-class. Not only in the restaurants that provide the nice food, but even in the QSRs. In the last 4 to 5 years, you've seen chains like Burger King, Pizza Hut, Hardee's, Subway, Cold Stone, KFC, Spurs. They're all coming. It's just a question of time when Kenya will be like any other city where every franchise will be represented. And then there is one more thing that happens in the main cities in most of the countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. We have a lot of aid that comes in. So Kenya, Addis Ababa, Kampala, we've got the United Nations, we've got every embassy here, we've got a lot of NGOs. That lends itself to another arm of hospitality, which is also developing at a high rate, and that is the extended stay hotel, or what we call the service apartment segment, which I think is important. But it's not all rosy. It's very easy to do business in the Western world because you get on the computer and you get your license and you get your permits, and as long as you're doing everything right, everything goes okay. Here in Africa or in Kenya, the typical hotel takes almost 4+ years to put together. Alongside that, if you're not using your own money, you're borrowing money at pretty high rates. The political climate in Kenya is okay, but it wasn't okay. Somalia, people talked about. So, when elections come around, when it's time to change the guard, business can be affected. Kenya is a good example. We have a hotel in Kisumu, we have a hotel in Nairobi. If Nairobi gets a cough, Kisumu gets pneumonia, So it's very important to not forget that as you make your investments in this marketplace. The other thing that for me was very frustrating when I was building the Kempinski is the red tape that you have to go through. The authorities, unfortunately, don't make it easy for you to develop, to import. And I can tell you, there's a lot of containers that sat in Mombasa and we paid demurrage charges because somebody wouldn't release them in time. So that's always a struggle, but the struggle means that your key cost of your unit goes up, so your ROI gets affected. And Mr. Kiruri talked about wildlife. The Pinnacle presentation talked about wildlife. And in the last few years, it just makes me so sad to see how much poaching is going on around Africa. Africa is about wildlife, and we're just not able to keep it in control, and it makes me very sad. And that'll affect tourism in the long run. So, what does this all mean? I'd like to just end with just a few words of why we did what we did and what we wanted to do in order to raise the bar in Kenya. So when I came 10 years ago, we went around the hotels, and the good hotels in Kenya were doing very well. The Serenas and the Sarovas were doing amazing occupancy, and it felt right to get into the hospitality business. But the one thing that I noticed that I thought we were not very picky about, like the Western world, is that because they were doing well, there was no desire to excel. There was no desire to give what we call world-class service. There were many, many, many hotels in this country that touted that they were 5-star hotels. But basically, when you went and stayed there, you got 3-star service. So, as the environment changes, as the brands start coming in, as the bar is being raised, there is no room now in today's world for mediocrity. If you're going to do something, do it right, or don't do it at all because you'll be left behind. And the world is changing too quickly. So if you're not a hotelier and you want to invest, it would be good to not look at maybe what percentage you're going to pay to that brand operator, but to look at that brand operator as that someone that is going to bring you, hundreds of years of experience so that your property is run like it should. Because at the end of the day, they might pay for themselves. So, having said that, I think the future for hospitality as a whole in the whole of Sub-Saharan Africa is fantastic. I think the next 10 years you'll see a complete change. And with properties like that and the Marriott, it's only a question of time when every brand, I think, will be represented all over Sub-Saharan Africa. So it's exciting times. Thank you.
So ladies and gentlemen, we have just enjoyed the privilege of listening to over 40 years worth of experience in the hospitality sector, and Mr. Nazir Khamisa pointed out so many interesting pieces of information that we can all use. And I think one of the points that really resonated with me, and I'm sure resonated with everybody else, was the need to do things with excellence, because there is no room for mediocrity. Anything that is done with mediocrity will be left behind and will be left to perish. And that is, I think, something that that hit us all very hard, and something that we will all take home from your presentation, along with the many other things that you have pointed out. So thank you very much. As a token of our appreciation, may I request Mr. Paolo Mazzi from Furere to come on the stage and hand over the memento to Mr. Nazir Khamisa. Furere, ladies and gentlemen, is a global leader in natural stone supplies from Italy. It's come all the way here to Kenya to be a part of our initiative.